A strange cry in the forest. It was a cold, quiet night. The wind moved gently through the tall trees behind Jake's small house. He was sitting on his porch, drinking hot tea, and looking at the stars. He liked silence. Life had been hard lately, and the forest was the only place that felt peaceful. But tonight, something was different. Jake heard a soft sound. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an owl or any animal he knew. It sounded like crying. He stood up slowly, placing his cup on the table. The cry came again. Soft, weak, and strange. It was coming from deep inside the trees. Jake grabbed his flashlight and stepped off the porch. He wasn't afraid. He had lived alone near the forest for many years. He had seen all kinds of wild animals, but this sound didn't belong to any of them. As he walked deeper into the woods, the cry became clearer. It was almost like a baby's cry, but softer. A mix of sadness and pain. "Hello," Jake called out. "Is someone there?" No answer, just another soft cry. He walked for 5 more minutes, stepping over dry leaves and broken branches. Then he stopped. His flashlight caught something small under a bush. It was moving. He bent down slowly. There, curled up like a tiny ball, was a strange creature. It looked like a little animal, maybe a cat or a rabbit, but different. Its fur was soft and white, glowing faintly like moonlight. Its eyes were big, round, and full of fear. And tears. The creature tried to move but collapsed again. It looked weak, cold, and scared. Jake didn't know what it was, but he couldn't leave it there. "It's okay," he whispered. "I won't hurt you." He removed his jacket and gently wrapped the creature inside it. It didn't fight. It just shivered and made a tiny sound, like a whisper. It almost sounded like, "Please." Jake's heart felt tight. He rushed back home, carrying the small creature close to his chest. It was warm now, but still weak. Inside the house, Jake placed it on a soft blanket near the heater. He gave it water, but the creature didn't drink. It just lay there, eyes slowly closing, breathing soft and slow. Jake sat beside it, watching. He didn't know what he had found, but it didn't feel dangerous. It felt lost. He stayed up all night, making sure it stayed warm. At one point, around 3 a.m., he saw something strange. The creature shimmered. For just 1 second, its body changed. It became longer, less like an animal, and more like a human. A tiny hand appeared where the paw was. The face almost looked like a girl's. Then, just as fast, it changed back into the glowing animal. Jake rubbed his eyes. What was that? He wasn't dreaming. He knew what he saw, but he didn't understand. The next morning, the creature was still sleeping. Jake sat by it, thinking. "Who are you?" he asked softly. The creature opened its eyes, slowly. It looked at him and blinked. Then, very quietly, it spoke. "Lou, Ma." Jake froze. His breath caught in his throat. You can talk." The creature, Luma, closed her eyes again. Jake stared at her, shocked. This was no ordinary animal. He had found something else. Something not from Earth. She's not just an animal. Jake didn't sleep much after that night. He couldn't. He sat in his chair, eyes fixed on the small creature wrapped in a blanket near the heater. Her name, Luma. She had spoken. Only one word, but it was real. He hadn't imagined it. Luma. That name echoed in his mind like a dream. Who, or what, was she? The morning sun filtered through the window, casting warm light on her glowing fur. She looked peaceful now, no longer shivering. Jake got up quietly and poured himself a cup of coffee. His hands were still shaking. She talked, he whispered to himself. A talking animal. But the memory of her transformation, how her paw became a hand, how her face shifted into something human, stuck with him more than the voice. This wasn't just an animal. This wasn't even just a strange creature. She was something else entirely. An hour later, Jake heard a soft noise behind him. He turned quickly and dropped his coffee. Luma was standing. Not fully, but enough to balance on two legs. She looked weak, her knees trembling. Her body shimmered, and for a few seconds, she changed again. Fur pulling back, soft skin appearing, and long silver hair falling over her shoulders. She was beautiful, not human, but close. Her ears were pointed. Her eyes were glowing, and she was scared. "Please," she said in a quiet, broken voice. "Don't be afraid." Jake took a step back, breath caught in his throat. But he didn't run. He couldn't. He saw the fear in her eyes. Real fear. She looked more scared of him than he was of her. "I'm not going to hurt you," Jake said slowly. "I promise." Luma blinked, then sat down gently, curling back into her half-animal form. She was exhausted. Jake knelt beside her, unsure what to say. He wanted answers, but how do you question something that doesn't even belong to this world? "Luma," he said softly, "where are you from?" She looked at him for a long time. Then, in slow, broken English, she replied, "Not here. Not this sky." Jake's heart pounded. She was not from this planet. "Are you an alien?" he asked. Luma nodded slowly. "I was not like this. They made me small, safe shape, to run, to hide." Jake frowned. Who made you like this?" She didn't answer. Instead, her small body began to shake. Her eyes glowed brighter for a second, and then she collapsed again. Jake rushed forward and caught her just before she hit the floor. No, he whispered. "Stay with me." Her breathing was fast. Her body was hot, too hot. Suddenly, a mark appeared on the side of her neck. A glowing symbol, like a tattoo but made of light. It pulsed softly, like a warning. Jake had never seen anything like it. "What is this?" he whispered. The mark looked like a circle with lines and stars inside it, strange and ancient. Jake gently placed her back on the blanket and covered her. She needed rest, but he needed answers. He opened his laptop and typed, "Alien glowing neck symbol with star pattern." Nothing useful came up. Nothing on Earth matched the symbol. Then something strange happened. His laptop screen flickered. Static appeared. Then a deep, cold voice echoed from the speakers. "Return the girl." Jake froze. The screen was black now, but the voice continued. "You found her. She is not yours. Return her, or we will come for both of you." And then, silence. Jake slammed the laptop shut, his heart pounding like thunder. Someone, or something, was watching, and it knew. That night, Jake sat beside Luma again. He didn't leave her side. He looked out the window every few minutes, half expecting lights in the sky or strange figures in the trees. But the forest was quiet. He reached out and gently touched Luma's hand. It was still warm. "Don't worry," he whispered. "I don't care what they say. I'm not giving you back." She moved slightly. Her eyes opened just a little. "Why?" she asked in a whisper. "Why? Help." Jake smiled sadly. "Because you needed someone, and I know how that feels." For the first time, Luma smiled too. Small, but real. Then she closed her eyes again. Far above the earth, hidden behind the clouds, a black ship floated in the sky. Silent. Watching. Inside, tall dark figures stood in a circle. Their eyes glowed red. "She has connected to the human," one of them said. Another replied, "We must act before she remembers everything. Before she awakens." Back on Earth, Jake didn't sleep. His eyes stayed on Luma the whole night. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But one thing was clear. This little creature, this beautiful alien girl, she was no longer just a mystery. She was his responsibility now, and he would protect her, no matter what came next. The alien truth. The next morning was colder than usual. A fog covered the forest outside Jake's house. It moved slowly, like it had a life of its own. Jake stared out the window, holding a cup of coffee he never drank. He hadn't slept, not even a minute. Luma was still resting near the heater, wrapped in blankets, her soft glow pulsing like a heartbeat. She looked peaceful, but Jake knew something dark was coming. He couldn't forget the voice from the laptop. Return the girl. Who were they? What did they want with her? Why was she running? Jake looked over at her. She was more than just a creature. She was someone. And he had made a promise. He wasn't going to let anyone take her. Suddenly, Luma stirred. Her eyes opened slowly. She sat up halfway and looked around, blinking like she didn't know where she was. Then her eyes landed on Jake. You stayed, she whispered, surprised. Of course I stayed, Jake said gently. You were burning up last night. Do you feel okay now? Luma nodded weakly. Still tired, but better. Jake moved closer. He sat down on the floor near her, his voice calm but serious. Luma, he said, I need to know the truth. Who are you running from? Luma looked down. Her hands, partly human now, trembled. Her voice cracked. They are not people. Not anymore. Jake frowned. What does that mean? She looked up at him, her eyes glowing softly. They were like me once. From my world. From Nirel. Nirel. Jake asked. That's your planet? She nodded. It was beautiful. Full of light, music, and peace. My people lived in harmony with nature. We didn't build tall metal cities. We grew our homes from living trees. We shared dreams through the stars. No war. No pain. Jake's eyes widened. It sounded like paradise. But one day, Luma continued, a darkness came. From far space. A ship. It looked empty. But it wasn't. Something lived inside it. Something with no body. Just hate. She paused, as if the memory hurt. It touched the minds of some of our leaders. Corrupted them. Made them hungry for power. They created weapons, enslaved others. They began taking children, like me, for their energy. They called us light bearers. We could shape reality, heal, grow, protect. But they used us to control. Jake clenched his fists. And you escaped. Luma nodded. My guardian helped me. He broke the chain around my mind. He said, run to the blue world. Hide, change your shape. They won't find you there. Jake remembered the shimmering transformation, the animal body, the clever disguise. You're saying, they're here? He asked, his voice tight. Yes, she said, eyes full of fear. They followed. Their ships can hide behind light. They use signals. Machines. They can control humans too. Jake's mind spun. This was bigger than anything he imagined. You're not just a runaway, he said slowly. You're a key. You carry something they want. Luma looked down again. Her voice was a whisper. I carry the last spark, the last pure light from Nirel's core. If they get it, they will destroy Earth too. A sudden knock at the door made Jake jump. Luma quickly shifted back into her small creature form. Jake rushed to the window. A delivery truck. No, it was too early, and no packages were expected. He peeked out carefully. A black car was parked just beyond the trees. 2 tall men stood near it. Their suits were too perfect. Their skin too smooth. They didn't look real. One of them tilted his head slightly, as if he sensed Jake watching. Jake moved away fast and pulled the curtains. They're here, he whispered. Luma trembled on the floor. Jake thought fast. He grabbed his backpack and quickly stuffed food, water bottles, a flashlight, and a small medical kit inside. We have to go, he said. Now. Luma changed again, halfway human now. Her hands were shaking. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You didn't ask for this." Jake stopped and looked at her. His voice was firm. "I don't leave people behind, especially not ones who need help." She stared at him, and something in her eyes softened. She reached forward and touched his hand. For a moment, Jake felt warmth rush through his body, like light was flowing from her fingers to his chest. His headache disappeared. His muscles relaxed. His fear faded. "What was that?" he asked, blinking. "I gave you part of my light," she said softly, "to protect." Jake smiled, a little shaken but more confident now. They rushed out the back door, disappearing into the trees. In the shadows behind the car, the two tall men watched the house silently. "She is moving," one of them said without opening his mouth. The other's eyes flashed red. "Follow, but do not harm the human." "Not yet." Jake and Luma ran through the forest for miles. He knew these trees, every path, every rock. He took her through old hunter trails and dry riverbeds. By noon, they'd reached an abandoned train station hidden by vines and trees. They rested there, hiding in a dusty old control room. Jake gave her water and crackers. She sat beside him, breathing hard. "I'm sorry," she said again. Jake laughed lightly. "Stop saying sorry. I've had more excitement in 2 days with you than in the last 2 years." Luma smiled for the first time. It was warm, gentle, and real. That night, as stars filled the sky again, Luma sat by the broken window, looking up. Jake sat beside her. "I miss my home," she said softly. "I miss the songs, the trees, the quiet stars." Jake looked up too. "You're not alone anymore," he said. She turned to him, her eyes glowing softly in the dark. "Thank you, Jake." Suddenly, she gasped and grabbed her head. "What's wrong?" he asked, panicking. "I remember," she said. "I remember something important." Jake leaned in. "What? What do you remember?" Luma looked at him, her voice shaking. "There's a ship, hidden, buried on Earth. My guardian placed it there before he died. If we find it, we can fight back." Jake's eyes widened. "Where is it?" Luma closed her eyes, the glowing mark on her neck pulsing again. And she whispered, "I know the way now." Chase through the city. The next morning, the forest was no longer safe. Luma's memory had returned. She now remembered the hidden ship, buried deep under a place once called the City of Echoes. Jake had never heard of it, but when Luma showed him a glowing symbol in the shape of a spiral tower, he knew exactly where it was. "Old Town," he whispered. "That's what we call it now." Old Town was a forgotten part of the nearby city. Tall, empty buildings, broken roads, no power, no people. A perfect place to hide something ancient. But it was also dangerous. Not because of humans, but because they were being followed. Jake and Luma made their way down the mountain and into the edges of the city. They wore hooded jackets Jake had found in an old hunting cabin. Luma stayed in her smaller form as long as she could, animal-like, silent, and glowing faintly under the cloth. Jake carried her in a backpack with the front open, so she could breathe. They rode an old train, then walked through narrow streets. The city buzzed with life. Cars, people, phones, but something felt wrong. Jake felt eyes on him everywhere they went. "Don't talk," he whispered to Luma. "We blend in. No one should notice us." But someone did. At a street corner near an electronics store, a tall man in a black coat stood perfectly still. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. His face was pale, too smooth, like wax. Jake turned his face and kept walking. He held the backpack tighter. The man followed. They ducked into an alley. "I saw one of them," Jake said. "We need to move faster." Luma peeked out. "They sense me when I'm near technology. Their machines can track my light." Jake cursed under his breath. He tossed his phone into a dumpster. No more tech. They ran through the alleyways, crossing broken fences and quiet back streets. Finally, they reached Old Town. The buildings there were gray and dead, glass shattered, doors hanging open, grass growing through cracks in the road. It was like time had stopped. Jake took out the small drawing Luma had made, a spiral tower with circles around it, a symbol of her people. "This way," she whispered. As they entered the heart of Old Town, they passed a wall full of graffiti, strange writing. But one part stopped Jake cold. On the wall, painted in red spray, was the same symbol Luma had drawn. "It's a sign," she said, breathing hard. "He was here, my guardian." They moved quickly toward a building shaped like a dome. It was once an old museum. Now it was just dust and silence. Inside, they found stairs going down, very deep. At the bottom was a metal wall. No doors, no signs. Luma stepped forward, placed her hand on it. And the wall lit up. The spiral symbol appeared. The wall slowly opened. Behind it, a hidden chamber. And in the middle of the chamber, a ship. Sleek, silver, floating just above the ground. Jake's jaw dropped. "It's real." Luma smiled weakly. The last ship of Nurel. She reached toward the ship, but suddenly, boom! The ground above shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. "They found us," Jake said, pulling her back. "We have to fight or run." "No," Luma said, eyes glowing. "We awaken it." From above, dark figures dropped through the broken ceiling. 3 of them. Their eyes glowed red. They weren't fully human. Jake stepped in front of Luma. "Stay behind me." He picked up a metal rod from the floor. It was weak, but it was something. The first figure stepped forward. It spoke without opening its mouth. "You were warned." Jake didn't move. "She's not going with you. You will break." The figure raised its hand. Suddenly, a wave of force hit Jake and threw him against the wall. Pain shot through his back. He coughed but stood again. Luma's eyes turned white. "You won't touch him." She raised both hands, and the chamber filled with light. The figures screamed, backing away. Their skin cracked. Sparks flew from their bodies. They weren't human at all. Machines filled with dark energy. One of them ran forward again, but this time, Jake threw the rod straight into its face. The metal bent, but the creature fell. Luma raised her arms higher. A soft humming came from the ship. Lights turned on. The silver body glowed. It was waking up. "I need time," she cried. "Hold them." Jake stood over the downed creature. The other 2 charged at him. He fought with broken pipes and bare fists. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't trained. But he had heart. And rage. "You don't touch my friend," he shouted. Behind him, the ship opened like a flower. Luma floated off the ground, her body glowing brighter than ever before. Her voice echoed, not just in sound, but inside the minds of every living thing nearby. "I am Luma of Nurel, last of the light-bearers. You will not take this world." The enemies screamed as beams of light shot out from the ship. One turned to black dust. Another fled, crawling into the shadows. The chamber fell silent. Jake fell to the floor, breathing hard, bruised, bleeding. Luma landed beside him, her skin now fully human-like, glowing softly. Her eyes gentle, full of sadness. "You fought for me," she whispered. Jake looked up, smiling despite the pain. "You glow. I punch." She laughed, for the first time. Later, inside the ship, Jake sat in a healing chair. Cuts and bruises were fading. Luma stood at the front, hands on a glowing console. "This ship runs on my light," she said. "But with your help, we can reach them before they destroy more." "Reach who?" Jake asked. She turned. "The enemy mothership. The one still hiding in Earth's orbit. They won't stop. Not unless we stop them." Jake stood slowly, So, we go to space. Luma nodded. We end this. Together. He looked at her. I'm just a human. You're more than that, she said. Your hope. Above Earth, in a hidden black ship, alarms rang. She remembers, said a tall, dark figure. And the ship is active. Another turned slowly. Then we end them now. Dozens of smaller crafts launched from the ship, racing toward Earth. But down below, in a silver ship glowing with the last light of a peaceful world, Jake and Luma were ready. Together. The alien girl awakens. The ship hummed with life. Silver walls pulsed gently, alive with soft blue lights. The floor beneath Jake's boots felt warm, not metal, but something smoother, like living stone. He had never seen anything like it. Luma stood at the center of the ship, her long hair glowing faintly, her arms raised as she connected to the ship's energy. She looked calm, but Jake could feel something building inside her, like a storm waiting to break. Jake stepped closer, careful not to interrupt. Are you okay? He asked softly. She opened her eyes and nodded. The ship is alive again. And so am I. Jake blinked. What do you mean? Luma looked at him. When I escaped, I locked part of myself away. My powers. My memories. It was the only way to hide. But now, everything is returning. A screen lit up behind her. It showed Earth's orbit and what was coming. Dozens of dark objects. Small ships. Moving fast. They're on the way, Jake said. Those things from last time. No, Luma said, her voice tighter now. These are worse. They are hunters. Machines built to capture light bearers alive. They feed on our energy. They never stop. Jake's hands clenched. So what do we do? Luma turned to face him fully. We fight, but not with bullets. Not like them. We fight with truth, with light, with what they fear most. Hope. Jake nodded slowly. Then I'm with you. The ship took off without a sound. It rose from the hidden chamber, through layers of earth and into the sky like a silent wind. A cloaking field covered it, making it invisible to radar, cameras, and human eyes. Jake looked out through the window as the ground fell away beneath them. I never thought I'd see Earth from up here, he said quietly. Luma smiled. It's beautiful, even with the scars. She touched the control panel, and images of cities, forests, and oceans appeared, live images from below. Then the images flickered. They were no longer alone. The first enemy ships arrived in Earth's upper atmosphere. Black, sharp, shaped like daggers. They moved without sound, without light, but they carried destruction in their core. Inside one of them, a tall creature sat in a dark throne. It had no face, only a glowing red eye in the middle of its head. She is awake, it whispered, and the human is bonded. Its voice echoed through the others. Prepare the net. Back aboard Luma's ship, alarms rang. They're trying to trap us, she said. Energy net. If they catch us, we can't escape. Jake looked at the screen. Can we outrun them? No, she said, but we don't need to. She reached into her chest, where the glowing mark pulsed, and pulled out a small orb of light. This is the heart of Mirel. It holds memories, music, peace. She placed it in the center of the ship. Immediately, the lights brightened. The ship responded like it was waking up for real now, not just functioning, but feeling. We're going to show them what real power looks like, Luma said. The battle began in silence. The enemy ships fired beams of black energy. Luma's ship danced around them, faster than light, dodging every blast. The heart of Mirel gave it speed, strength, and vision. Jake sat beside Luma, holding tightly to a control lever. How can I help? He asked. Be my anchor, she said. You're my connection to this world. You'll keep me grounded while I use my full light. Then Luma stepped into a ring of symbols that rose from the floor. Her eyes closed. Light exploded from her body. Her hair floated. Her skin shimmered like the stars. The girl Jake found in the forest was gone. In her place stood the last warrior of Mirel. Enemy ships tried to close in. But as Luma raised her hands, beams of pure light shot out in all directions. The enemy vessels twisted and cracked. Some exploded without sound. Others retreated. Inside Earth's space stations, scientists saw flashes of light they couldn't explain. Some believed it was a meteor shower. Others said it looked like war. Meanwhile, down on Earth, something even stranger was happening. People began seeing visions. Children looked to the sky and said, "A girl is singing." Old men saw dreams of silver forests and glowing lakes. People heard music in their minds, soft, peaceful, otherworldly. It was the heart of Mirel, reaching out, touching Earth. But not everyone welcomed it. Governments panicked. Radars picked up strange movement. Satellites crashed. Emergency meetings were called. In one secret bunker, a general slammed his fist on the table. "Whatever this alien is, we shoot it down." But as they prepared missiles, their systems shut down. All screens turned white. And one message appeared. "She comes in peace. Harm her, and you harm hope itself." Back in the sky, Luma's energy began to drop. Jake saw her shaking. Her light flickered. "Luma, are you okay?" She opened her eyes. "They're trying to block me. Dark signals. They drain my strength. I need more time." Jake placed his hand on her shoulder. "Take mine, whatever I have." Suddenly, the ship glowed brighter. Luma gasped as strength flowed from Jake to her. Not energy, but courage. Will. The pure fire of the human heart. She stood taller, stronger. Her light returned, brighter than before. The remaining enemy ships turned to flee. But Luma raised her hand. No more running. She released a final wave of light. So pure, so strong. The sky turned white for a second. Then silence. Every enemy ship vanished. Gone. The sky was clear. Inside the silver ship, Jake slumped in his seat, exhausted. Luma walked to him, glowing gently again. "You gave me your strength," she said. "You didn't have to." Jake smiled weakly. "I didn't give it. You borrowed it." They both laughed softly. Then, outside the ship window, something unexpected happened. Hundreds of tiny lights appeared in the sky. Stars. "No," Luma gasped. "They're responding." "Who?" Jake asked. She looked at him, eyes wide. "Other light-bearers. Across the galaxy." They felt the signal. "They're coming." The ship slowly returned to Earth, landing near a quiet mountain far from any city. Luma stepped out, the heart of Mirel in her hands. Jake followed. The sun was rising. She looked around and whispered, "This world is worth saving." Jake smiled. "Then let's save it." But far above, in deep space, something still watched. A being larger than any ship, older than time. A shadow with a single eye. "The girl has awakened," it said. "But the war has only begun." One human versus an alien army. The world was changing. After the battle in Earth's sky, strange reports filled the news. Glowing lights. People dreaming the same dreams. Children drawing spiral symbols they had never seen before. Some called it a miracle. Others called it a threat. But deep in the forest near the mountains, where the silver ship now rested, Jake and Luma were preparing for something even bigger. The final wave was coming. Inside the ship, Luma stood in silence. The heart of Mirel floated above her palms, spinning slowly, glowing softly. Jake sat on the edge of a platform, watching her. He had cuts on his arms, bruises on his chest, and sore muscles everywhere. But he didn't care. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't powerful. But he had something the enemy couldn't understand. The human spirit. "You okay?" he asked. Luma nodded slowly. "The stars are calling. but not all of them are kind. She turned toward Jake. Her eyes had changed. They were older now, wiser, like she carried the weight of 1,000 years. "They're sending the final army," she said. "Not just machines, not just hunters. This time, it's their commander." Jake's face grew serious. "The shadow with the red eye." Luma nodded. "They call it Varnuk. It was once a star being like us, pure light. But it lost its soul. Now it lives to consume other worlds. He leads the final wave himself." Jake stood up. "Then we fight." Luma hesitated. "I'm afraid." Jake stepped closer. "You, after everything." She looked down. "Not for myself. For you. If you stay with me, you'll be in more danger than ever. He will come for your mind. He will try to break your heart." Jake smiled. "Let him try." Luma touched his chest. "You don't understand. Your soul is untrained. Your heart is strong, but open. He can twist that. Turn it against you." Jake took her hand. "And I have you. That's all I need." That night, the stars flickered unnaturally. Animals ran from the forests. Birds flew in strange patterns. The wind stopped. Even the moon looked dimmer. In the sky, a giant shadow appeared. Bigger than mountains, darker than night. It wasn't just a ship, it was a living being. A monster made of space and hate. Varnuk had arrived. His voice echoed across Earth, not through sound, but in the minds of every living thing. "Lightbearer, come. Surrender, or watch your human burn." Jake grabbed his head as pain hit his brain like fire. Visions flashed in front of his eyes. Cities burning, people screaming, Earth cracked in two. "Get out of my head," he shouted. Luma rushed to him, placing both hands on his temples. Her light pushed back the darkness. The visions faded. Jake collapsed, breathing hard. "That thing," he said, gasping. "It's already inside me." Luma knelt beside him. "You're strong. He didn't break you." "But I felt it," Jake said. "His power. It's like emptiness, like nothing matters anymore." She looked into his eyes. "That's how he wins. He makes people stop believing." Jake took her hand. "Then we make them believe again." They returned to the ship. The heart of Narelle glowed stronger than ever now. It pulsed in time with Luma's heartbeat. Jake stood beside her, wearing a silver suit the ship had made for him. Light, soft, but strong as steel. Luma looked at him with pride. "You're ready." He raised an eyebrow. "Ready for what?" She smiled softly. "To fly." The ship shot into the sky like a beam of light. Faster than sound. Faster than thought. They flew toward the shadow hanging above Earth. Enemy crafts came at them from all sides, like insects protecting their queen. Jake took the controls. He wasn't trained, but somehow the ship responded to his emotions. He moved by instinct, dodging blasts, weaving between enemy ships. Luma stood behind him, her arms glowing, sending beams of light through the walls, striking down enemies without touching them. One by one, the ships fell. But the giant shadow waited. Inside the dark core of Varnuk, the creature watched them approach. He wasn't afraid. He had eaten stars before. He had turned galaxies into dust. A girl and a human meant nothing. But still, a small fear crept into his mind. Why hadn't he broken the human? Why did the light feel stronger now? Jake and Luma entered the heart of the shadow. It was like flying into death itself. No stars, no warmth, just endless dark. Inside, time slowed. Space twisted. Luma floated beside Jake, her body now glowing like a second sun. "This is it," she said. "He will try to tempt you, trick you. Don't listen." Jake nodded. Suddenly, everything changed. They were standing in Jake's childhood room. The forest outside. His mom in the kitchen. The smell of pancakes. Jake froze. "What? is this?" Varnock appeared, not as a monster, but as a kind old man. "Stay here," he said gently. "Be happy. Forget the war. Forget her. Isn't this what you want?" Jake looked around. It felt so real. Warm. Safe. He looked at Luma, now just a shadow in the corner. "Don't leave me," she whispered. Jake turned to the old man. "You're not real." Varnock's smile faded. "You don't have to die for her," he hissed. "She's not your kind." Jake stepped forward. "She may not be my kind, but she's my friend. And that's more than you'll ever understand." The room shattered. Darkness screamed. Luma grabbed his hand, and they rose into the air, both glowing with light. Varnock's true form appeared, towering, with one red eye and long black limbs made of smoke. He roared, sending waves of death energy at them. Jake held up his arms. The silver suit turned bright. Luma raised the heart of Muriel. "This is for all the worlds you destroyed." The heart exploded in light. Jake and Luma flew into the center of Varnock, light tearing through the darkness. He screamed, tried to escape, but light filled every part of him, until nothing remained, just silence. They floated in space, holding each other. Earth was below, safe. The sky was clean again. Later, as they stood outside the ship on a mountain peak, Luma looked at Jake with tears in her eyes. "You did it," she whispered. "You saved a world that wasn't even yours." Jake smiled. "It is mine now. You're in it." She laughed softly. Then in the sky, a ripple appeared. Silver, her true form, his true love. It had been 3 days since the battle in the stars. The sky was quiet again. No enemy ships, no fear, only peace. For the first time in years, Earth was still, as if the world itself was catching its breath. On a mountain peak hidden from the cities, Jake stood beside Luma. Wind touched their faces, sunlight warmed their skin. The silver ship behind them was silent now, like it too was resting. The light bearers had left earlier that morning, hundreds of glowing ships rising like stars in rivers. They had returned to their worlds, carrying messages of hope and unity. But Jake and Luma stayed behind, because for them, this world wasn't just saved. It had become home. Jake sat on a rock, looking over the valley below. Trees danced in the wind. Rivers sparkled in the light. He had been through fire. He had fought aliens. He had touched the stars. But nothing felt as real as this moment. Behind him, Luma approached, barefoot, glowing faintly in a long flowing dress made of silver light. She wasn't hiding her form anymore. She was her true self now, fully awakened. Not human, not creature. Something beyond. But Jake didn't care, because her heart was the same. "You're quiet today," she said softly, sitting beside him. Jake chuckled. "Just thinking." "About what?" He looked up at the clouds. "About how I used to believe my life didn't matter. That I was just here, living day by day, doing nothing." "And now?" she asked. He turned to her, smiling. "Now I know I was waiting for you." Luma looked down, blushing. Even her glow softened. "You're not just a human, Jake. You're the reason I survived. You're the reason Earth was saved." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You did most of the saving. I was just the guy with the bruises." She shook her head. "You gave me something Varnock could never understand. Trust, love, heart." They sat in silence for a moment, letting the wind speak for them. Then Jake stood up. "I have something to show you," he said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, smooth rock. It was dark and plain, except for a glowing spiral he had carved into it. Luma's eyes widened. "That's our symbol." Jake nodded. "I carved it yesterday. I thought, maybe this should be a reminder." "Of what?" Jake smiled. "That even something small can hold the universe inside it. Luma took the rock gently and held it to her chest. Her eyes filled with tears, soft, glowing ones that sparkled like stars. "No one's ever given me a gift before," she whispered. Jake stepped closer. "Then let me give you one more." He took a deep breath. His heart was beating fast. "Luma," he said, "I know you're not from here. I know you have wings, light, and magic I'll never understand. But still, you chose to stay. You chose me." He paused. "I don't know what the future holds, but if you'll have me, I want to walk it with you, wherever you go." Luma looked at him, tears still falling, a glowing smile on her face. "You already walk in my light, Jake, and my heart." She leaned forward and gently kissed him. It was soft, bright, warm, like touching the sunrise. That night, they sat by a campfire outside the ship. Jake cooked something over the flame, and Luma watched curiously. "This is called marshmallow," Jake said, holding a stick. "You heat it until it melts. Then it tastes like magic." She giggled. "We had something like this on Narelle. We called them skyberries." Jake laughed. "That's a better name." She took the stick and held it wrong, nearly setting it on fire. Jake laughed again and showed her the right way. For a moment, they weren't heroes or aliens. They were just two souls, sharing firelight and laughter. But even in peace, mysteries remain. Late that night, as Luma slept near the fire, her head resting on Jake's shoulder, a soft sound came from the trees. Jake stood up slowly. A small creature stepped into the light. It was glowing. Round eyes, soft fur. It looked almost exactly like how Luma had looked when he first found her. But this one was different. It didn't speak. It didn't run. It simply looked at Jake and bowed. Then it turned and vanished into the dark. Jake stood there, frozen. Had another light being arrived? Or was it something else? He looked back at Luma. She was still asleep, peaceful, smiling. The next morning, Jake told her about the creature. She didn't look surprised. "I felt it too," she said. "There are more coming. Not light bearers, not like me, but connected." "Connected how?" Jake asked. She placed her hand on his chest. "To you, to your kind, to your story." Jake smiled slowly. "So this isn't the end." She shook her head. "This is just the beginning." Months passed. Jake and Luma traveled together across Earth. They visited cities, met people, helped rebuild what fear had broken. Luma taught children how to grow glowing plants. Jake taught her how to drive a pickup truck. Everywhere they went, people smiled again. Not because they believed in aliens, but because they believed in something bigger, hope. The story of the human and the alien girl spread like a legend. Songs were written, pictures drawn. Some believed it, some didn't. But one thing was true everywhere. People were dreaming again. And that was enough. 1 year later, on a bright morning, Jake stood in front of a school in a small village. He was older now, stronger, wiser. Beside him, Luma floated gently off the ground, her hands glowing, planting seeds of light in the dirt. Flowers grew instantly, shaped like stars, glowing softly in the sun. A little girl asked, "Is she your wife?" Jake looked at Luma. She looked back and smiled. "Something like that," Jake said. The girl giggled. "She's pretty." Jake nodded. "Yes, she is." That night, as the sky filled with stars, Jake sat with Luma on the rooftop of an old school building. Below, children were singing, a song Luma had taught them from Narelle. Jake leaned back, watching the sky. "Do you miss it?" he asked. "Narelle," she whispered. He nodded. She smiled. "Not as much as I used to." "Why?" She looked at him. "Because now, I'm home." And far above, in a distant part of the galaxy, a new star was born. Bright, pure. They called it hope. and it carried the name of a human who believed in a girl who glowed, a human who didn't run, a human who loved.